Ladies and gentlemen, we move on now with the presentation, and it is my great pleasure to introduce our next presenter. Jay Patel is the Managing Director of Ashon Ventures, New Zealand. Welcome, Jay.
Thank you, Glenys.
Ashon's ethos are based on delivering high-quality consumer goods to customers in New Zealand in the quest for value for money. They started out targeting the Polynesian consumers and later extended their reach to a broader consumer base through various channels of distribution. We'll hear more from Jay about their company here in New Zealand and what they can do for you and some of the lessons they learned. So over to you, Jay, and again, thank you for joining us.
Thank you, and thank you for inviting me to present a brief on the New Zealand market for those who are looking at coming into this market. Just a brief background very quickly about Ashon Ventures. Is part of a business from Fiji, from the Ashon group of companies, which has been involved in FMCG, manufacturing, and obviously distribution. And what we've learned from the past, that has been applied into New Zealand market. So effectively, when Ashon Ventures started in New Zealand in 1989, the first thing that we looked at was introducing products that we were familiar with from the Pacific. And it, as Gladys mentioned, that night was from the Polynesian products that we started off the business. Could we just move on to the next slide, please? So the business started off with core products being coconut cream, mackerel, cabin bread, as a starter. Entering into the markets, who our channels are in New Zealand is basically your major supermarket chains that we deal with, your fruit and veggie stores, and the likes of No Hospitality. Sorry, I've just skipped a bit early on, but no, in terms of No Ashon is importing products globally from Fiji, Australia, Southeast Asia, China, India, Turkey, and South Africa, and so on. It has got a sister company as well, called Thai Pacific, which exports products from New Zealand into the Pacific, and another distribution arm that does liquor. We just move on to the next slide, please. The brands that we represent in the market over here that was developed are Pacific Crown, Taste of India, FMF, which came on board recently, Kitchens of India, Ching's, and Sol Tuna, which is of recent that we've started, Solace Choice. These are the brands that now have received good following after getting listing in the supermarkets. Now, the question of getting products listed in the supermarkets. Could we just quickly move on to the next slide? Now, in terms of channels that now we service, there are the major supermarket groups in New Zealand, which is the likes of Pack and Save, New Worlds, Four Squares, Countdown, Fresh Choice, Super Values, and in the food service area, Gilmore's, Bid Foods, and the likes. Getting products listed is what is quite important for somebody who's looking at getting into the market. And dealing with the supermarket, obviously, what are they looking for? First thing they would always question is, what is the consumer looking for? And how, as a supplier, we will meet the requirements. Typically, the stores are looking for quality products, supply, they're looking for margins. All these aspects need to be identified well ahead before actually looking at entering in the market. Currently, the supermarkets are looking for products that are unique. They have got some point in difference, which the consumers are looking for more towards the likes of vegan or they are organic. Replacement for meat is something that is growing in the market currently in New Zealand, which is plant-based. So as an exporter, I think it's quite important whichever company they're looking at working with, they need to understand the requirements of what the actual market is looking for. The margin structure is quite important. But prior to coming to that, I think it's very important that now the exporter needs to be very mindful of the fact that now they are able to produce the quality required, the volumes that may be required, and meeting the price points and promotional activity for those products. And these aspects need to be looked well ahead before venturing into looking at exporting any products into the New Zealand market. These things can be looked at working very closely with the company that now the exporter is looking for working through. And currently, we see there's an opportunity for the Pacific Island countries to export their products into New Zealand more so than the traditional markets where the products are currently coming from in terms of Asia, where there's a demand, supply, lack of availability of equipment or packaging material and things like that. And the major factor being the cost of freight. This is one advantage that Pacific would currently have in the market for gaining entry into New Zealand. Cost of freight has become a major element for the business and businesses. So coming back to the products, very important to have good quality product, consistent quality, and consistency in terms of pricing being offered. What we present as an importer and distributor to our customers is that now we have built a trust with our customers over the past 25 years of running the distribution business in New Zealand. The new facility that we've recently built is to bring in the efficiency and bringing to market those products that now are looked for by the supermarkets, have actually seen that now we are meeting their requirements. So the important part is that now what we say we deliver. So at this point in time, the service level is quite prime important. So pricing may not be a major issue. So could you go to next slide, please? So Ashon Ventures currently has got a facility that can store up to 8,000 pallets, of which around 1,500 pallets is frozen, and the balance being in ambient. And what the company currently does is basically runs a warehouse management system, which brings in all the efficiencies that's required for the business to operate and be in front of your major players in the market, as I'd mentioned earlier on, the two supermarket chains, Foodstuffs and Countdown, being the major players in this market. Having a good relationship is quite important in this market. It's a very, very important aspect that now there needs to be a regular contact with the category buyers at the supermarket level, and always being in contact and seeing what they're looking for and what we are able to procure for them. That relationship does help long-term in terms of ranging the products. So what's involved in terms of ranging a product? Typically in a supermarket, they have reviews, category reviews, and these are done on a yearly basis. Sometimes they have a minor review as well. And there's a process that takes place. Basically, when a review takes place of a category, the category manager will look at what is selling and what is not selling in the marketplace and make a decision based on what needs to be on the shelf and what needs to go. Currently, all the supermarkets are now looking at using, and actually are using consumer data and their buying behavior, and using Dun Humphreys being one of the companies that now gives you an insight of the consumer, of their buying habits. So they're looking at the real estate of what they're turning, what their return on investment is on the shelf. So in relation to that, it's quite important that now, firstly, the demands for the consumer, what they're looking for is met. Innovative product, quality, and it's meeting the price expectation. As a supplier, it's important that now we meet all these requirements along with what promotional activity can take place in getting the product to become successful. Classic example has been Ashon Ventures has been quite has worked to get a brand of simmer sauces quite successful in the marketplace, but by investing into the market through sampling, offering the right price point, and continued sort of now being in front of the consumer by advertising in the likes of magazines, or now with digital marketing. And those are the aspects that now needs to be done at an ongoing basis, because these are the things that the supermarkets are looking for, that know what are you actually doing for your product, how are you bringing in front of your consumer, how can they recall the branding. All these aspects are also quite important. This is basically in a nutshell that know what we are doing as a business. So we are open to looking at exporters out of the Pacific who are looking to gain entry into this market. We've got a lovely big facility, and we've got obviously the network already established for a range of categories that we are in, and it's expanding. Frozen products is obviously a new category that we've started. So opportunities for agro-based products is quite good, and I feel that now we could look at now suppliers would be keen to talk to, if got suppliers of the areas. I heard early on that now the likes of okra in Fiji, there's an opportunity there. Obviously now your frozen taro and cassava is one of the big exports. Daruka, as was mentioned, would definitely be another product that has got a good opportunity. If we can just move on to the next slide, please. Okay. Sorry, this has been a bit of a rushed sort of presentation, but no, maybe if anyone has got any questions they would like to get answered, Lennis.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Jay. And my team and I had the pleasure of visiting your factory. I think it was earlier this year or last year. How time has flown. And we were not pleasantly, but we were really, really impressed by your operations out there. And you could see quite clearly the level of investment that Ashon has put into building a new facility. You certainly are one of the leaders in the market. And just on your presentation, I wondered whether, Jay, you could just spend a little bit more time talking about that whole ecosystem around ranging of products, because from the presentations this morning, I think it's important to share and instill in the minds of SMEs and exporters that yes, there is a process and certification. We heard those presentations and those key messages from MPI and food safety. We heard from Rohan and Alo this morning how important it is to get your priorities right and your checklists in place and take those steps to knowing what to do in what order. But from your side, where you're actually in the market, you're interfacing, as you said, with buyers, and you've listed them, those companies that Ashon deals with. Could you just kind of spend a little bit more time explaining how that whole ecosystem works, getting product to market, You talked about the ranging of products and and that whole review process that buyers go through.
And so typically what the supermarkets look at is, obviously they've got their own private label. Then obviously you've got now maybe one or two market leaders or second and third brand that are there in the market that now obviously support the product. They are forever looking for their return on investment on the shelf, as I said earlier on. So what are the consumers looking for? So the process of review is quite important. Whenever they're having a review of any category, they go through everything in sync by product line and SKU in terms of what is giving the best returns. And bearing in mind what the consumer is looking for and what innovations is coming through. And in trying to attain that, obviously they look at a lot of data, not only from New Zealand and Australia, probably globally, to see where the trends are taking place. And decisions are based on where everything's heading. So the process is very simple. During the review process, they will look at the market size. Obviously, currently what both retailers are looking at is increasing their private label business. Obviously, it's in their own interest. Typically, if you look at UK, the private label business is worth probably 34% of what their sales are, whereas in New Zealand, it's very low base. It's currently sitting probably around 11%, 12%, but it's growing but a very small rate, because your players in the market, the market leaders, they're quite strong in terms of their branding. I would give you a good example of Seaload as being one of the companies that's involved in canned tuna and fish category. Supermarkets get rebates. They give the opportunity to do the planogram for the supermarket because they are so strong and control over 65% of the market. So those who are sitting in that sort of level, I mean, obviously no, it will be very difficult to shift. But if you're looking at a low base category that's worth probably $6 or $7 million, you have a chance of actually making a dent in that and attaining a good growth and share, provided you have a product that is all natural. It's meeting the requirements for the palate, for the consumers, and the pricing is right, and you're promoting it properly. So the listing process, obviously, as I mentioned early on, that no review takes place, and they take into account all these aspects to see, because the supermarket shelf has got only so much space. So they decide on what to cull back on, what's turning over enough for them. So they have a requirement. Is it giving me 5 units per product per store per week? The different categories got different sort of requirements. So that's what the supermarkets actually look at. Would that be something that now, Gladys, that you or the listeners would want to?
Yes, absolutely. And I guess, does the same apply to fresh and frozen things sitting in the supermarket from the Pacific?
More so, fresh and frozen would be in the same scenario, but no, probably similar, I would say. But because it's fresh produce, the supply chain is quite an important aspect, because that's where everything sort of now needs to be well planned, because fresh produce you can't keep for very long.
Indeed.
So there needs to be a constant check on what the movement is. And henceforth, that's the very reason that now supermarkets have got selected people that they are well versed with the type of products they're dealing with. So if we're talking about root crops, they have a very good idea of what the movement is, where the population base is, where the consumption is. And it's not, the listing takes place based on the demographics. And if you've got a market for, say, taro or cassava, and you're saying, okay, Porirua, for example, in Wellington, there's a market for that, or Mangere in Auckland, you might say. So now where there's a use, you've got seasonal workers coming into New Zealand working in the orchards. So it could be Hastings or Palmy, or it could be even Nelson and Blenheim, because now this is all relative to the seasons. that could be one of the aspects that no one needs to understand.
Mm.
Similarly, for your frozen products, if you're talking about frozen taro and cassava, there's more market. The market is more for the fresh rather than frozen. But if you are having issues with logistics and manning that, so now the next best option is to go frozen. But obviously, there's a cost element involved. Anything that you're dealing with frozen products, there's a cost to it, and getting products around is not cheap. So there'll be a lot of work involved in that area.
Yeah. It sounds, Jay, that it sounds to me from your explanation that the process is quite competitive, isn't it? So competitive in the sense that you have, when supermarkets make the decision as to which product to take off the shelf and replace it with, and in that replacement product could be from the Pacific, whether it's chili oil or chili sauce or corned beef or salt tuna, for example. It's a competitive process, isn't it?
Very much so.
Right? So in the minds of exporters, isn't that an important point for them to consider? That when they're looking to the New Zealand market, any segment of the market, they need to take into consideration or know that to get their product into a supermarket or wherever the case may be, they're competing with someone else, another supplier in the same category, right?
Definitely. They're competing under the supplier. So now, obviously, now what happens is that now, if we're talking about now root crops, for example, and frozen, I mean, the products are also coming from Asia, and you're competing with Asian products. I touched very briefly on the freight costs. I mean, at this point in time, I believe that the freight cost is probably cheaper to send from Fiji to New Zealand as opposed to Asia. So the opportunities for frozen, from frozen perspective, it's probably an opportunity there. But yeah.
Thank you very much, Jay. I'm going to ask now all of the presenters to, would you mind please switching your videos on as we go through the questions, and I direct the questions to you. So Alapate and Nava, Rohan, Alo, if you're still online. Thank you, Anthony. If you could switch your videos on, and let's see your pretty faces. Where's Alo Vinaka? Okay. So some very, very interesting and very, very useful guidelines and recommendations and suggestions, and very, very good and very, very useful recommendations that have come through in the presentations this morning. I'm going to spend a few more minutes now, if you allow me, to pull out some of the questions and direct them to the respective presenters. So just bear with me, please, if you don't mind. And the first question is I'm going to start down the bottom, from Mr. Arkoy. Okay, here you go, Anthony. For the market you are exporting to, what are some other products that you are currently not exporting, but are considering venturing into? For instance, herbal medicines and tonics, such as lila, turmeric, warusu, I think I've got warusi, has become increasingly popular and in demand here in Fiji. And I think there's also a market for it overseas, also in Tukai limited to frozen goods only. I hope I'm answering the question correctly. So Tony, you have a couple of minutes.
Okay, thank you for that. We've deliberately kept the product set quite narrow. At this point, I have to say the comment that we're only really just scratching the surface of developing the farm. So we've probably got about 70 acres under crop at this point. We've tried everything on the farm. Everything kind of works, but the process of getting a product to market, and as Jay has pointed out, you really are competing against the best of the best in New Zealand. So you've got to get it absolutely right. And if you want to play in the big leagues, you are having to put on the, put in the ship or in the freezer container a world-class product. And that's, so we've deliberately kept it narrow. We haven't really entertained even other root crops like cassava, like kumala, or although we've tried it on the farm. We will eventually get to it. But at this point, our focus really is on just getting this product, this basic product right, and then getting our outgrower network adopting some of the technologies, some of the techniques, so that they also get their supplies right and are able to meet that standard that's required by the market. You know, this is, you know, it requires a lot of discipline and control.
Yeah, understandably so. Thanks, Anthony, for that. And the next question is for Jay. So for Ashon, do you have an entry type of deal for a green exporter, then grow to an optimum point? And the second question is, you mentioned the name of a company which leads, I think it is, on customer data and the demographics and buying patterns. Could you just share that information again? I think someone's interested in that. And also the question around entry type of deal for a green exporter. Both questions to Jay.
So entry type for green exporter. I mean, unfortunately, we're not in the fresh produce area. But no, so now we are actually not geared for that at this point in time. Having only recently built the freezer, so currently only in the frozen goods area. On the second question, basically, Dunn Humphrey is a research company. It's an American research-based company that globally they collect data, and they're measuring what the consumer behavior is, and seeing, measuring when they're in the store and they're looking for a product. What makes them change the decision? If they do not find a product they normally buy, how do they decide, and what do they buy as a next choice? It gives an insight on the buying pattern of the consumer. So this sort of data is collected, and which is what the supermarkets are now actually using for deciding what to actually list as a product to keep and what to delete.
Okay, and a follow-up question for Jay. What is the top 5 products from the Pacific you are looking to import at the moment?
Currently, I mean, it was quite interesting when I heard on, because now I've got a new facility in frozen products. So now, obviously, I'm looking for anything that's viable for us. So Daruka will be definitely one that I'll be looking for. Okra, as I was mentioned, that now if done is another one. Bora beans, I don't know, pigeon beans, I would say that's another one that's probably a product that I'll be looking for.
But we've got growers from Tonga on the line. We've got growers from Samoa, Solomon. So what would be your advice to those countries?
So those are the products. I mean, if they have got the farming climates do sort of conjure for them to plant that, it's from any part of the Pacific that can get that product. We'd be happy to look at that.
Okay. And would you be in a position, either yourselves with or through Pacific Trade Invest New Zealand, to offer to the Pacific Island countries those very intricate information about windows of opportunity, which products at which times of the year, etc.?
Yeah, definitely.
In the market, you would know, right?
Yeah, definitely we would. Obviously now with tropical climate, obviously the products have got a season, so what is available and what's not. So now once we have a good understanding of that, because supply is quite an important aspect, especially when you're talking about talking to the supermarkets. I mean, you cannot have stop-start scenario with them.
Yeah. Okay, thank you, Jay. Now a question to all of you on the panel. What would you offer as pearls of wisdom to growers and exporters from Tonga, aside from their watermelons, Vanuatu, Solomon Islands, Tuvalu, for example? So Tuvalu is, I guess, would be concentrating on maybe fisheries products as opposed to agriculture. So for all of you on the panel, what would be your advice to these countries looking to export to New Zealand?
talk to people like Ashon Ventures. Of course, we've got the market knowledge. I mean, we're open. I mean, you can always contact us in terms of now trying to see where the opportunities can come out from, because we are talking to our customers every day. We've got people on the ground who are working throughout the country, and they're feeding back all the information where the gaps are.
Jay, just on that, there's a lot of, and I mentioned this earlier on about the stuff that's coming in from the Pacific, the fresh and frozen, mainly fresh, that's coming in from the Pacific Island countries into the informal markets. Again, that's a pure supply demand issue, right? There's a high level of demand from the diaspora wanting their cassavas and taros and fish and kava and what have you. How do we turn those into a business opportunity for exporters who for a long time have chosen to go down the path of that supply targeting that informal market here in New Zealand? Is there an opportunity, so say in Tonga, for those wanting to get into cassava or taro more so than what they're currently doing? And what would be your advice to them?
Yeah, so the target market is obviously, the product can be from any Pacific Island country because the population base here is from different parts of the Pacific. And sometimes there's allegiance to their own country that they want products from. Yeah. So now it's a matter of getting the right form, because now you've got so many different species of taro or cassava. So now opportunities are there, really.
Yeah, Alo, based on your experience with the coconut industry in Samoa, what would you offer as some suggestions to growers in Tonga?
Thank you. I guess like Mr. Akui was referring to, is that the relationship between the farmers and also the processors and the exporters is very important. And that relationship needs to be coming from what most of the presenters have been saying, is understanding the market overseas, like what Mr. Patel has been saying, understanding what the requirements are and all that is very important before we start. So I guess before that will trickle down to the exporter with the right price or whatever. The market, the product going overseas is a pathway to get there. And then the benefits will come back to the farmers through higher prices. So I guess that relationship between the processors and the farmers is very important. Communications and also what requirements need to be done right from the grassroots, all through the supply chain, all the way to the market. So I guess we have to, for the processors and the exporters, to really understand what the market is about. Talking with Jay, it's really hit the nail on the head there. We really had to understand what the markets are before we plant anything or before we start anything, so that we have that pathway to success, which is very important going forward. So that's my advice. So, yeah.
Thank you, Alo. Thank you very, very much. A question or a few questions for MPI. The first one is on kava, and this is to both Nada and Alipate, and you can who is to answer. So kava is a growing industry, obviously, and one of heightened interest to growers and exporters across the Pacific, as well as here in the New Zealand market. And you mentioned Codex, sorry, gosh. What would you say to growers and exporters in the kava industry in the kava producing countries of the Pacific, insofar as this market is concerned? Is it a mature, is the New Zealand market mature? And I'm talking about the formal market, not the informal, where we have a lot of growth swipers. But is there a formal market for New Zealand, and is it an emerging market, one which kava producing countries from the Pacific ought to know about?
Sorry, Glenys, I need to excuse myself.
Oh, okay, Jay.
Sorry.
All right.
Thank you, everyone. It was
Thank you very
lovely.
much, Jay. Appreciate it. Thank you. We'll be in touch. Manaka.
Okay.
Matanumra.
Alipate, you're on mute.
I'll just unmute it. I remember a while back there was a cover pilot program that MPI was involved in, and and the main objective of that is to allow the commercialization of importation of cover. That was discussed, I think, between New Zealand and Australia was the facilitator of that particular item, and that was shared back. I think it was early this year, around about April, between the two countries. There's definitely conversations going on in there between the two countries, but I don't understand the specifics though, so I can always go back and check it and provide that to the forum. I have a document in front of me about what was discussed between the two countries at that meeting, but I just gotta have to figure out what I can and can't reveal at this stage.
That's fine. That's fine. I didn't mean to put you on the spot.
Yeah.
From your side, was there anything that you can offer for those in the cover sector?
One sector. I can remember the discussion that Alipati was referring to. This was because of the commitment that was made by Australia to the Pacific, where they were going to increase the
Allocation.
the allocation to the I think to the passengers coming into Australia, and that was supposed to be 2023 or 2025. But now I think the foreign ministers, they've pushed for, you're shaking your head, Glenis, you know this, they're pushing for that to be like done as quickly as they could. So that's the whole reason why Australia is involved. But I think from the biosecurity end, I remember there used to be few exporters. I'm just saying this because we were invited to sit in one of the meetings whereby a consignment of cover was held at the border in Auckland. That was when I then realized that he was big in terms of cover exports to New Zealand. He operates, I think, in Nausori, in Fiji. And he's been sending like 2 containers of cover a month. So I think there is a market, but I think formally that's still yet to be established and ascertained. But I think there needs to be more work done in this area in determining to determine the size of the market and how cover is actually consumed right across the country, Glenis.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Tony, there's a question for you around.
Sure.
Sorry. How do you test your product for contamination?
That's a good question. We off our farm, obviously, we don't use any pesticides or herbicides, so that product is, we know what goes into it, which is pretty much why we've chosen the path of more or less organic production. Off our outgrower network, it's kind of like an honesty system. We actually ask the growers, how they do it, and we have a close relationship with them, which we've established over a few years, and we keep dealing with the same guys, so we sort of know what they do in their operations, and that provides us those assurances. Right?
Thank you. You know, the issue of testing and contamination applies to any produce, not
Yes,
just
yeah,
cassava and
yeah.
taro. So, Alo, in your case for coconuts and the coconut products and other products that your council with your members, how would you respond to this question around contamination and your testing method?
I guess we're sort of like in the same boat as Tony. It's more or less about what we know our farmers. So, so there is some inspection that goes into it. We do go and inspect the farms just in case that there is some spraying with weed, you know, insects. I mean pesticides or weedicides. But more or less, we do have just trust our farmers that they are doing the right thing, which most of them do anyway. So, because most of us, especially with the coconut plantations here, it's basically just manual labor, maintaining the farms through weed control. So that's about it. Yeah, that's what we trust our farmers and the relationships we have with them, that they will maintain natural, which is organically but not certified at the moment, practices. So
yeah, okay. Thank you both for that. Look, I'm just conscious of the time. We've gone well over an hour, and I'm sure we could spend the rest of the afternoon covering off on the questions and me picking your brains from here. I really have to bring this day one to a close, and in doing so, I offer on behalf of my team at Pacific Trade Invest New Zealand our sincerest gratitude to each and every one of you for giving up your time today to join us on this webinar. Your experiences through your presentations have been extremely worthwhile, and I'm sure that those listening in would have learned quite a few new things that they didn't know yesterday, that they know today. So thank you very, very much. To those registered and online, we will be sharing with you, as I said earlier on, the presentations and the context of the presenters for today's session. We will also get through all of the questions, either through the sessions tomorrow or offline, probably on Thursday or Friday. I'll have to talk to Rohan about that. So again, Vinaka Vakalevu, thank you very, very much for your time. Most appreciated, and we'll talk again soon. Vinaka. Thank you, everybody.
thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner.